Hello, everybody. Jeremy Bruce here with Saga Media. We have two special guests here, and we have Mary Beth
Cirucci
and Emily Greene of Americans for Prosperity. We have a long list of things to talk about about your organization, the upcoming election, and a lot more. But to our guests, if you have any comments, please feel free to comment. Tell us your thoughts on anything we discussed today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. We are on YouTube. We are on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find us all through there. So thank you, ladies, for coming. It's a pleasure. I've been trying to get you on for about a year almost.
It's been a while.
But we wanted to just get into first introductions. Whoever wants to jump in first, you can introduce yourself. Tell us about maybe your background and what you do for your organization.
Excellent. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for having us. It's so great to be here. I'm Emily Greene. I serve as Deputy State Director with Americans for Prosperity Pennsylvania, one of 37 Americans for Prosperity chapters across the nation. We just have the privilege of working for the Pennsylvania team. I have been with Americans for Prosperity for 6 years, and I currently live in Ardmore, right outside of Philly, but grew up in Bethel Park, just down the road from where we're chatting today.
So I'm the coalitions director for the state of Pennsylvania, and I've been with AFP for a little over 2 years. And prior to that, I worked for 2 different Pennsylvania state legislators. So I'm very happy to be out of the swamp and on the advocacy side, let me say.
Yeah, that's good. So tell us then about Americans for Prosperity, maybe where it started, who are the founders, and how it kind of transitioned to what you guys do and what you are today.
Absolutely. So we are so proud to share that this year we're celebrating our 14th anniversary as a state chapter, but Americans for Prosperity as an organization has been around for 20 years. So if you're unfamiliar with Americans for Prosperity, you're listening in today, we exist to be the taxpayer's lobbyist. Whenever we walk into Harrisburg or we walk into the Dome in D.C., there are plenty of lobbyists that are representing special interests. The one special interest that doesn't seem to have the representation that they so deserve is us, we, the taxpayer. So that's the role that we play in the political ecosystem. Every issue that we support, it is because it is what's best for the taxpayer, best for the, mom and pop business owner who want to start a business down the road. Or, the individual who's working to make ends meet because of this economy, which I know we're going to get into a little bit later. We exist to make their lives easier by getting government out of the way so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
Interesting.
And the corporation as a whole was started 20 years ago. You asked who the founders were. Yep. The founders are Charles and his brother David Koch, one who's deceased, but one was libertarian and one was Republican. So we tend to have center-right leanings, but we advocate for limited government policies and bottom-up solutions.
And that's a good, how you described it as well, as center-right, one libertarian, one Republican. You generally don't find libertarian in the name of a lobbyist group, especially when this large. So that's good because I believe that gives the difference, because it's usually always so far one way, so far the other way. Mm-hmm. And that special interest, if you want to call it that, is down the line. That gives us a little bit of in the middle, I feel personally what we need more. So
we're advocating for a lot of economically based policies that you find on the left and the right. So.
Yeah,
and quite frankly, the special interests that we represent, the taxpayer, they're Democrats, they're Republicans, they're independents, they're libertarians, but they all have a common interest, and it is to make sure that government isn't throwing new regulations on them, not taxing them. Those are the issues that we care about the most, and it really transcends partisan divides.
And from what you're describing, it sounds like it's really grassroots.
Very much so. Exactly.
Yeah, more so because, I'm self-employed, so I have to go, and I've gone to the grassroots ones, and I've gone to the ones where it's specific for corporations, and you don't see the everyday Americans at those ones. Yep. It's always somebody with a VP title of some sort, and you don't get the family of 4 who's struggling at XYZ neighborhood and wondering what's going to go on in their community over the next 10 years. So that's good to know. Now, about the founders, so what strived them to start this? Because obviously if anybody doesn't know who they are, they're pretty successful in business over many, many years and generations. But was it just they saw something at some point in their life that they needed to kind of get into? Is there like any?
Yeah, there was
Yes.
there was a policy that in one state that started the organization that they advocated against.
Well, I would really encourage anyone who's listening in to pick up Good Profit. It tells the story of Charles Koch when he took over his father's business, Koch Industries, how he was able to grow that business 10x by really employing what he calls creative destruction in his business, and how when you empower the individuals that work for your company or organization, no matter how we're thinking about what we call principles-based management, when you employ market ideas and concepts into how individuals within your community operate, you can really grow your business, grow your profit. So I would encourage anyone who's listening, check out Good Profit. If you're a business owner or you are, the CEO of a corporation, whatever it may be, when we talk about principles-based management, which is the philosophy that Charles Koch employed at Koch Industries, and also we live out every single day at Americans for Prosperity, it empowers individuals to really amplify their contributions to whatever company it is, because it's a free market approach, if you will, to organizing people, and it's right. Really brilliant.
Yeah, it is a great book.
Yeah,
I mean, because he really took the principles that made him successful in business and is applying them to government and communities.
Good. We need more of that, especially in today's world. So, no, that's good. So, getting into economy, so that's a good history of the background, and I appreciate that. And I know this is going to be a topic we're probably going to go through many levels with. So currently, we're obviously in an election year, which is a big one. There's a presidential election. There's a lot in the state, and we can kind of break it down. But your work today has been based off like economy. And we know that over the last 4 or 5 years, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on or what party you represent, it's been a struggle. I mean, we had a worldwide pandemic and a lockdown, and a lot of businesses went out, and since then, mass inflation. So tell us, I guess, what currently is like the main focus point on what you're trying to do or put out there for the economy. And maybe that's a lot of things, but what would be tops on the list?
Well, for me, I'm focusing on the themes of our company that we're driving, and one of them is Prosperity is Possible, which started last year, and the other one is Bidenomics, is bad economics. So Prosperity is Possible is basically a positive campaign that covers 3 key points of what can make America prosperous again. And one of those is less spending in Washington, D.C. I mean, we have inflation because Washington has a spending problem. They spend an average of $1 trillion more than they bring in every year. So that's a problem, and that's driving up interest rates, short story. A second is an all-inclusive energy policy. I began to get involved with the energy industry 2 years ago, and because of the policies and the regulations that the Biden administration immediately introduced on the country, and we were seeing $5 per gallon gas prices. So that's the second tenet. And the third one is around worker freedom, worker choice, which is really the antithesis of the PRO Act. You know, we are advocating for people to make their own choices in what they do for a living, whether they want to be a gig worker, they want to be a 1099 subcontractor. And Joe Biden would like to see those choices go away and see you all work for an employer. And you mentioned COVID. I mean, during COVID, people had to be very creative in how they made money and supported themselves. So we do not need to take worker freedom and choice away from American families who are struggling right now. A year ago, we had 40-year high inflation, and right now we're still at 19-point-some% inflation. And we talk to people every day, and they're feeling it at the grocery store mostly. When they try to put food on the table for their kids, they're still feeling it at the gas pump. The second campaign I'm working on is Bidenomics is bad. You know, we have Joe Biden touting that Bidenomics is a great way to save the economy. And, you know, it's like, have you been to the store? Have you paid your bills? You know, Bidenomics is not working. So that's our second campaign.
And just to add to, so this Biden administration has been adding insult to injury. Okay, this is not news to anyone here, of course. But so what Prosperity is possible is looking to address is the fact that, Washington spending, $6 trillion to be exact, has gotten us into this position with inflation that every single one of us is feeling. And then this administration is saying, no, we are going to take away any opportunities for flexible work. So I know so many people in my inner circle, in my orbit, who are having to take on a second job to really just, put food on the table. Mm-hmm. And this administration is saying, no, actually, you can't do that because we are going to put a stop to the gig economy. So sorry, you have to deal with the rising costs of everything. So it really is truly insulting. And what Mary Beth is looking to do across the Commonwealth is share there's a better opportunity. Washington can put a stop to this tomorrow if they wanted to. But here are the policy solutions that can get this economy back on track and allow flexibility across our workforce.
So you brought up a couple of points. I meant to actually bring in, first thing, the grocery store, and I forgot to bring it, but I really noticed inflation. It sounds very small when it comes to a dollar standpoint, but Aldi is a great place to shop. A lot of organic food, and it's generally
Love
cheap.
Aldi.
Yeah, me too.
I
shop there pretty frequently. But there was a brand, I believe it's Bergman's. It's a steak sauce.
Yeah.
And it's, a smaller bottle, but in December of 21 or 20, it was 21, I believe, or 22, when inflation really spiked. It was always 99 cents for years. Well, literally, in 2 months later, it was February of 2022, it went to $1.99. Now that's 100%, and that's when I noticed that this is getting to be in trouble. And if you look at a lot of just the foods in general, it's crazy how expensive it is. I watched some guy on a podcast the other day. I was just laying in bed before sleep and watching him. He was talking about how he lives in Mexico now and how he visited Las Vegas. And he said, I went to Las Vegas and got a cup of coffee and a breakfast, and it was $76. And he said that's insanity. So, and another thing you touched on was the COVID and the gig work. It's funny how they're trying to get rid of the gig work now, but that was who was still working when everybody else is at home during 2020.
Your Uber Eats and
that gives individuals the freedom of being able to work at their hours, their pace, and not having, because maybe 9 to 5s don't work for everybody. And so, and in the right place, you can make a lot of money in gig work. And so it's, I personally don't know how they could even try to get rid of it, but I get it. I guess if you run the restaurants out, I mean, it was a pretty good job 4 years ago. It hurt that industry. So,
but you know who this directly impacts? When you take away flexible work, that impacts mothers across this Commonwealth. That impacts groups that, quite frankly, this administration is trying to reach because they have an election in a few months. Mm-hmm. So truly, I feel it will have, consequences on this administration.
In energy, obviously, I do that for a living. It's a big part of my business. It's how we met. And we had a discussion off camera just about how crazy the energy prices are about to get. So the goal for the energy space, I mean, when you're going out and talking to communities, I mean, what are they saying to you other than just my utility bills and the gasoline prices are?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people don't understand, first of all, why we have inflation. I did bring you a couple stats since Joe Biden came into office on this subject. Home heating oil is up 44%, gasoline 33%, electricity 29%, natural gas 27% increase. People are making decisions on what they have to cut out of their life just to buy food and pay their utility bills. We just did an event at a daycare center, and I had talked to a woman. Childcare is outpacing the cost of childcare is outpacing inflation. So those people are really in a bind. And one of the moms was there, and she said, I'm in the healthcare field. And she said, we have patients that come in, and they're advised to come back for repeat treatment, and they decline it because they don't have the money. Wow. Their co-pays are too expensive. They just can't afford it. And she said, some of those are maybe just recommended return follow-ups. And she said, some of those are necessary treatments. So we run into this all the time. We do events to draw attention to this issue and try to educate people on the causes, not corporate greed. The causes is overspending in Washington is the simple answer. We educate people on that, and then we give them some of our policy solutions. And we give away, like, grocery store gift cards or gasoline, where we lower the price of gas to $2.38 a gallon, what it was when Biden took office. People forget. It's so amazing how fast people forget, and they just accept, we were talking about this, they just accept inflation as the new norm and the standard, and you can't change it. So we just go out and talk to everyday people and try to educate them and change the narrative, and then also provide a little bit of relief, which they greatly appreciate.
Which is, charity's always just the best, especially when you can get gas for $2. I mean, I drive a full-size truck, so I know what $4 a gallon gas is. It's crazy.
What is that up to now?
Well, I did find a $3.40
right.
in Perryopolis. So give some props to the gas stations in Perryopolis, PA, because your gas is cheap. That's a far drive for me. So, but yeah, $3.80 on normal. So like it takes. I mean, I generally only get down to half a tank and fill it, but that's like $60-$70 for half a tank of gas. Which is, it's crazy. It is out of control, and you wonder what, people are trying to work. And at some point, when you're only working to pay your bills or barely pay your bills, is that what kind of quality of life are you presenting? And America's better than that.
Well, that's the majority of people. And it's even worse for some people. Some people are going into debt right now. Credit card debt's at an all-time high again. So, people are not just living paycheck to paycheck. They're living paycheck to paycheck and borrowing money.
I have a contact that I know who works at a credit card debt resolution company. Mm-hmm. They are going insane with the amount of demand. I mean, just working 70 hours a week. I mean, this is out of control. And you brought up that, like charity is important. What adds to that, too, is the education piece. Because what we look to do at Americans for Prosperity as a grassroots organization is inform and educate. Because the best influencers on a member's vote are the people that either get them elected or don't. So when we talk with people, we want to make it as easy as possible as for them. So we're meeting them when they're pumping their gas. And, they're going to show up to the local sheets whether or not we're there, and because they need to put gas in their car. So why don't we educate them about a policy solution? We're in Guy Reschenthaler's district right now, that Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, who is a very great vote with Americans for Prosperity, by the way, not worried about him. But, why don't you call Congressman Guy Reschenthaler and tell him that you support HB1, Lower Energy Costs Act. And these are people who would never, come to an AFP event or like a local civic organization event, spending their weeknights with us. But while they're pumping gas, they can certainly help move the needle on a piece of legislation.
Right. That's one thing I love about Americans for Prosperity is that you go to our website, americansforprosperity.org. You can see all of our issues. But there's so many people who don't know how to get involved. Some of them don't even know who their legislators are, let alone how to contact them. Yep. And you can pick on our website issues that are important to you, from healthcare to immigration, to the economy, to fuel, and actually click on a link and automatically send one of our letters that you can preview to your elected official. So it really is an easy way to get people involved who haven't been involved before, who don't know what to do or how to get involved.
So in speaking of, and this doesn't need to go singling anybody out, but what are the elected officials? We'll stick to Washington and then get to Pennsylvania since that's where we're based. But what are on both sides of the aisle, because I'm sure you talk to both and you deal with both, and I don't know if one side's more than the other, but, speaking of the spending and the out-of-control spending, because it is out of control, and, to really put it in a perspective, the national debt, if you stacked it in dollars, would hit the International Space Station. We might even be halfway to the moon at this point, but I know it was about the International Space Station or something like that.
It's so much, it's $33 trillion. I don't think people can comprehend how much debt we're in, but you can put it down to each American family. I think it's about $250,000 of debt on your back. From the federal deficit.
Yeah, that's great, and it's getting to them at the gas pumps. That's a great way to do it, or at the grocery store, because then you're really hitting with it. Because trying to talk about like $33 trillion, like you said, doesn't really resonate sometimes, and it is hard to fathom. But what are they saying in Washington too? Because we've been hearing this for so many years about trying to change we're going to cut our spending, but then you keep hearing about $90 billion goes to this country for this or for this program, and there's Senator Rand Paul. He used to put out, not as frequent, but last year every week or 2 weeks he would put out a few different radical spending and programs and like tests on animals and just really silly I'm talking 30 million here, 60 million there to see if an animal can write on a piece of paper. I mean, some really silly things. Don't quote me on it.
And it's crazy,
yeah,
right?
And I just said
Because
this is either being done on purpose or it's just I can't. There's no logic behind it.
Yeah.
So is that like what do they say to a group like yours? Or are those do they try to not really have as many of those?
Well, they hate that a group like ours exists because we are the citizen watchdogs, in Washington and in Harrisburg. Without groups like Americans for Prosperity, they could be writing blank checks to insert special interest here. But that's what we exist to do, to educate, to inform. And I mean, it is just so insulting that you have members of Congress who would rather write a blank check to a special interest when there are individuals in their district, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, who are making trade-offs every single day about whether or not they can put gas in their car to go to work or put food on their table to feed their families.
I'm pulling up Rand Paul's Instagram right now. So, now that we're saying that, because I have to get into some of these really quick.
We do have some friends in the legislature.
Yeah.
It's crazy where they were, and while you're talking, I'm going to try to find these, but he used to put these out, and I can't
look for that.
Yeah.
We have a great staff in Washington, D.C. that's there full time. That's where our corporate office is also. And yesterday I was talking to one of my colleagues in government relations there, and basically what he said to me was, what is concerning is that there is no appetite for budgetary reform coming from Washington, D.C. And I can say that on both sides of the aisle. We have Congress who isn't really prioritizing that at the moment. And for me, it's very concerning. And for people who are going to be voting, I think that's something that should be on their radar.
Well, and Mary Beth, while he's pulling this up, why don't you talk a little bit about what we call the Bidenomics 5, which sounds like a superhero group, but it's really not that cool, and actually they are the bad guys. I'll hand it to you for this.
5.
The Bidenomics 5.
What's the 5?
Oh, so there are a number of senators that are up for re-election this year and are... You know,
I thought you meant a good thing.
No. The Bidenomics 5. There's 5 senators who we have coined the Bidenomics 5 because they are, they have been complicit in $6 trillion in new Washington spending, and they are looking to blame anyone they can. I mean, corporations, what have you.
Yes.
But ultimately, the finger should be pointed right in the mirror when they're looking at it.
Right.
And I'll just hand it to Mary Beth to share a little bit more about that.
Well, we've had several, I call them Biden's bad acts, that have really got us into this position. They're the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which did the opposite. I think they come up with the opposite game for names for these bills and these acts. But they all created and made inflation worse. And the 5 senators that vote lock in step with President Biden are our one and only Senator Bob Casey, John Tester, Jackie Rosen, Sherrod Brown, and Tammy Baldwin. They all played a key role in getting Bidenomics through Congress, which is basically voting for this excessive government spending that's done nothing to drive up spending, and give corporate handouts, and they keep double downing on the policies that we need more of them to make things work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to read a couple of stats now because this is the first one I found, but this was from Senator Rand Paul. It says, "Stop the waste, stop the madness." This was a number of years back, but this was $6 million on Albanian tourism, $43 million on a gas station in Afghanistan, $15.6 million on foreign students' college tuition. Now that was from a number of years ago, but he's got a laundry list of that just tells you. I mean, let's get past the tourism and stuff. But I mean, how does a gas station anywhere cost $43 million? And that gets into where regular Americans, no matter who's doing this, because the Republicans are on it, it's just as much in a lot of cases.
Sure.
And they sign off on these deals, but it's like, well, then why do we have homelessness, bad roads? I mean, realistically, with the energy we have here, I mean, we shouldn't be paying more than $1. I mean, I remember the days of 89-cent, 99-cent gas. I used to have like muscle cars back in the day, and I remember when it got the 99 cents to put in for high-test gas. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I couldn't imagine $4, but like it really hit 2 summers ago when you started seeing the people when they were pumping, taking the the line coming in and shaking it to get those last little drops when it got to like $4.20 or 30 cents. But I mean, I couldn't imagine today if it's going to get there to where $5 to $6 is the norm. And I believe we're right there. And so,
well, and to add to that as well, Pennsylvania has one of the highest gas tax in the nation.
Like
so
the
to
highest,
use the
I think, at this point.
Yes, I believe you're right. I think
63 or 70 cents per gallon around there.
That sounds
back
right.
and forth from us in California.
Yeah, which is not a competition we want to be in. We should never be competing with California.
So on, not to cut you off, I apologize, but on that subject matter and to in Pennsylvania, like what is the reason why? Because Pennsylvania does have some aspects where we do have low taxation in a lot of ways where other states don't. But why the gas tax?
Well, that is something that you will have to ask your state representatives and state senators. But ultimately, there was a measure in the Senate this legislative session to roll back the gas tax. And, Senator Cameron-Bartolotta, whose district we're in, she was a strong proponent of this. Unfortunately, we have a Democrat-controlled House, and that landscape is entirely new. There was just no appetite in the House. But
and is there any Democrats that you have or know of any conversations that are open to? I mean, I don't understand why they would be opposed to this on either side.
Well, there are Democrats that certainly it would be in their best interest to vote for something like this. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that we've kind of lost control of the narrative in Harrisburg. And the idea is that more like throwing money at a problem in their minds is the best way to solve it. Sure. And they're okay with doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's like Groundhog's Day. But ultimately that's why we exist, right? To let them know, hey, actually, maybe Harrisburg is not the best entity to solve this problem. So we have conversations with members in Harrisburg and Washington every single day. Remind them that this is not about special interest. This is about your constituents.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially in areas that are, 40 years of kind of trying to rebound from a lot of industry that left the area, especially in Western Pennsylvania. So, So now moving forward into the elections, because this can kind of go hand in hand. Across the board, we'll get into the federal with the presidency and whatnot. What's your group kind of outlook over the next few months of how, what action you're taking? And then I think we talked off camera about this. What is your group going to look like? I mean, because this could go one way or the other depending on who wins. I mean, what does the after the election look like depending on both? And then we can kind of dive into state and local.
Sure. I'd love to give an overview of the federal landscape. So I also serve as advisor with Americans for Prosperity Action, which is our entity that engages in federal races. So to kind of walk through the landscape, there's 3 congressional races that Cook Political has as either an even district up to an R+2, meaning that it is favorable for conservatives in that area. So we have endorsed Rob Mercuri. AFE Action has endorsed Rob Mercuri in the 17th Congressional District, a seat currently held by Congressman Chris Deluzio. We've endorsed Ryan McKenzie up in the Lehigh Valley, who is running against incumbent Susan Wild. And we've endorsed Rob Bresnahan, who's running against Matt Cartwright in the 8th. And, that is an R+2 seat. So ultimately, that should be an area that's favorable to, our issues, which is getting government out of the way, lowering taxes, lowering the regulatory burdens on businesses. So we're very optimistic. The largest investment, and the one I am so excited about, is Americans for Prosperity Action's endorsement of Dave McCormick for U.S. Senate. So his opponent, let's set the table here. His opponent has been in office for longer than many voters have been alive. Or, his dad, who was in office prior to him as governor, lieutenant governor. I mean, there's been a Casey on a Pennsylvania ballot for 6 decades. And where has that gotten Pennsylvanians? Not very far. So we are super excited about Americans for Prosperity Action's endorsement. And, what we do best is we are a grassroots organization. So we're reaching voters right on their doorstep, asking them what issues matter the most to them. And this is going to come as no surprise to anyone here or anyone listening. The 2 top issues that we're hearing at the door are inflation in the economy and immigration. Those are going to be the issues that are at the top of the ballot this year. And Fortunately, there's a better way. Dave McCormick will address both of those issues by cutting wasteful spending and addressing the growing crisis at the border.
In those issues, are you seeing that also on like a center, like independent or more like how often do you have conversations with the Democrat voters or the center left or ones that are, because there is I would say more have gravitated towards that over in that last 10 years, where it's not as so hard right or left. But, do you have these conversations with, say, a Joe Biden supporter 4 years ago? And has any of them come out and say, well, I'm unsure? Like, what do they say?
Yes. What we've seen is that we knew there was going to be a lot of noise around the presidential race, right? So we have said, Americans for Prosperity Action, we are going to invest in what we're calling our Senate firewall strategy. So ensuring that we're fighting back against the idea of one-party progressive rule in Washington, because we cannot afford 4 more years, particularly if the House were to grow in members that don't necessarily vote more with Biden than they do with the alternative. So we are looking at, ensuring that we're talking with voters that, may want to sit the presidential out, like don't really have a strong opinion, but also feel as though they can't take any more of Washington's wasteful spending. So we've talked with Democrats, we've talked with Republicans all across the political spectrum. And what we're hearing is that immigration matters to everyone. The inflation and the economy matter to everyone. I think traditionally there's been older mental models around, immigration is a red meat issue. Only Republicans care about that. That's changing. Like that has changed quickly because every state is a border state. Even though Pennsylvania may not be on the southern border, we are still feeling the impact of that. So it's true. To answer your question, yes, everyone across the political spectrum is feeling this.
And then you brought up a certain politician with the last name, and that they've been in office for how many decades, 5, 6 decades. But you see, that always seems, being in and out of politics myself in some capacity, it seems as though the average voter just sees the normal name and they're comfortable with that.
Sure.
So, and it always seems like it doesn't change. So it comes down to like, what can you do to kind of get, because I believe this is like going to be the closest it's going to get to maybe, getting a new representative in that seat. And I think it's the strongest capability. But like, how do you get the person who just shows up and they're like, I see this name and this guy must be a good guy. His dad was nice 40 years ago. And I see it and it's comfortable and it's familiar and I don't know this new person and it comes down to, and that's also their party. Even though they might not be happy, I believe a lot of politicians become career politicians because they kind of fly under the radar. Yeah. But that's what you get is a flat line for 3 decades and then they get a really nice retirement package. Right. So it's like, that's the challenge that I always see. Like, what do you do to kind of, I know the education, but it's an emotional standpoint, I believe, as well.
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Jeremy, because what we're doing to ensure that we're educating voters is knocking on their door. So we have set a goal. Americans for Prosperity Action is going to knock 1 million doors on behalf of Dave McCormick and our congressional endorsements across the state by November 5th. And we are already, making huge strides at that number. This would be a first for Americans for Prosperity Action, but it's that important. We need to knock those doors because here's the thing. We have statistics, and I'm going to butcher this, but when you make that initial conversation with a voter at the door, they are a significant percentage more likely to actually turn out to the polls. Because I've been there, I'm sure all of us have, where it's Tuesday night, you came home from work, you got to go to the polls, you're just tired. And sometimes for some people, that can just not be a priority for them. But if we're to get them at the door beforehand and explain to them, hey, this is the most important election in recent history. There is so much at stake here. We can encourage them to make that a priority after a long day at work, or they just picked their kids up from school. Like getting them to think about a time that they can carve out of their Tuesday, November 5th, to go to the polls is what we exist to do. what we're doing as well is layering our the tools in our toolkit, right? So we'll knock their door. We'll talk with them about the issues that matter to them. They may then, in their user journey, if you will, continue on and be scrolling through Facebook on a Wednesday night and see an AFP action for Dave McCormick digital ad. After that, a few months later, they might receive a piece of mail explaining why Dave McCormick's opponent has not served their interests and how we can get this economy back on track by electing Dave McCormick to the U.S. Senate. And that layered approach continues to encourage them to actually show up on November 5th, or just simply, get their ballot in and make it a priority, because there's so much at stake this year.
So door knocking has to be a lot different today than maybe 20 years ago. How many ring conversations do you have?
Can I just tell you, I love having those conversations at the door. And people are always so confused, but they usually answer. And that's what's great. I think it's actually helped what we call our take rate, our conversation rate. Because people can be at work and just talk with us during doorbell.
Or out to dinner or lunch and out at the swimming pool now that it's summer.
People think the opposite. They think, well, nobody's home today. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, we got to ring doorbell.
You're always home. You're always home. Give me 5 minutes.
You can pretend like they're home and still talk to you through the door from wherever.
Yeah.
So, in real quick on Dave McCormick. So, what's obviously what we've already talked about, but is there a topic or a goal that he has set out if he's elected that's number one over anything else other than just getting the economy back? I mean, what would he do differently than what they see it's going on with Casey?
He would not vote for trillions of new spending. He would not present a blank check in new spending. And we are so grateful for that, because Pennsylvanians can't afford this anymore. I mean, we have got to rein this in. So he's made a commitment to taxpayers that there will not be more of the same. He will rein in the spending and get this economy back on track.
Good. Pennsylvania state elections, anything coming up big there, or anything you want to final touch on with the previous statement?
Absolutely. So across the board, there are a number of huge congressional races to watch. Americans for Prosperity Action has endorsed in 3 congressionals. The one I'm so excited about is PA 7. So current Representative Ryan McKenzie is running to represent the 7th Congressional District in Washington. He has been a fighter in the state legislature. He's going to take that same fight to Washington to rein back spending, because his opponent, Susan Wild, has voted in lockstep with this administration. Rob Bresnahan in PA 8 is a business owner. He understands the needs of the district in a way that his opponent, Matt Cartwright, doesn't. So he's going to be a fighter and certainly work to address the border crisis at the southern border, because that's a region that's being very, very, very directly impacted by immigration issues. We're also excited about Representative Rob Mercuri, who is running to represent the 17th Congressional District just north of here. He's been a staunch fiscal conservative, and certainly his opponent, Congressman Chris Deluzio, has also voted in lockstep with President Joe Biden. So taxpayers deserve more, and these 3 candidates that AFP Action has endorsed are going to vote against the status quo and bring transformation to those 3 respective districts.
Now, we talked off camera about Pennsylvania budget. Mm-hmm. Where's the status on that? I mean, that's kind of important, because the Governor Shapiro had announced earlier this year about $500 million was going to go towards industrial and to rebuild, industry and reshoring. Because some statistics, this is an industry that I'm pretty deep in, and so. I know in 2022, the stats were within like 6 states around us. Ohio had reshored, I believe it was like 43 or 47, don't quote me on that, but somewhere in that range, 1,000 manufacturing jobs. I believe West Virginia was like 8,000, New York was like 60,000, and even Maryland had about 14 or 15, but we only had 4,500 in the whole state. And so is there any knowledge that you have or anything you could add about where the budget is this going to be passed? 'Cause, I mean, it's almost July. I know, and so, and I
didn't we go to December a few years ago?
Yeah, last fiscal
year.
year.
Boy, it's hard to believe this was
I know. It feels like many years ago. Well, I was just in Harrisburg at the Capitol yesterday, and it is peak budget season. What we've seen is that it's gotten off to a bit of a slow start. Americans for Prosperity has applauded Senate Republicans for passing a comprehensive tax cut package. House Republicans have also introduced a similar package. They're trying to make that the cornerstone of budget negotiations. House Democrats have some other ideas. But as it pertains to the energy industry, because we are sitting on so many incredible natural resources where we are right now. Governor Shapiro, if you recall, when he was running for office, said that he was going to get Pennsylvania out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That was a campaign promise that he could not fulfill. He did challenge the Commonwealth Court's decision on the constitutionality of it. And since, there was just a hearing in the House during, budget negotiations around a new cap and tax policy that this administration has introduced. So they're again trying to put guardrails on these incredible natural resources that, spoiler alert, would drive down the cost of gas prices. So that again is another part of the budget negotiations that unfortunately we're going to see House Democrats support, putting caps on carbon emissions, and we just can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I work in that industry, so we build out, microgrids and small power plants and everything in between. But it's really challenging. We have a site in Washington County that we were slated to try to plan a power plant, a gas-fired power plant a few years ago. We had kind of gone through the motions, and the reason why we never even got out of the batter's box was because of the carbon emissions that would have, it just handcuffed us because we fell under a line, even we're as far out as we were, that's still close enough to the city of Pittsburgh that would have really tightened us in to that we wouldn't get approved of an air permit. So it's things like that that are really holding it back, and also permitting itself and trying to do these. I mean, if Governor Shapiro is going to keep his word about trying to compete with the surrounding states that I had spoken of with reshoring, there is an unbelievable opportunity right now, because I'm involved in this in so many spaces to build out industrial parks, energy parks, new commercial to bring industry. So because we can build all the new lavish little housing or bike lanes and little areas here for live and play areas, but without industry, there's nothing that's going to support that. And I believe this area and region, at least on the western side of Pennsylvania, has really suffered since the steel mills have closed. And we have an opportunity right now, especially in the tech sector, who's looking for energy-rich areas to provide electricity for them to build out data centers with AI expansion, data mining, and high computing, and there's and these are really good paying jobs. So there's a part of the industry that we really need to focus on, and so does it look like? And I guess when you speak on, is there any Democrats that say that they're okay with this? Because I mean, at least Governor Shapiro said he wanted to do $500 million. Is that still on the table? Do we know, or is that still gray area and we're kind of in the dark?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a big difference between what they say and how they vote and the actions that they take. So, to his credit, Governor Shapiro has passed a level of permitting reform. Now, this was through executive order. If he were serious about true, meaningful permitting reform, we would see him urging House Democratic leadership to codify this into law. But instead, this is an executive order where, if he's not elected in 4 years, or 2 years, I should say, if he's not elected in 2 years, this would then, go to a new administration to address. When we codify this into law, that enables us to have real permitting reform for the industry, for small businesses, for everyone. And we've supported a number of permitting reform bills that have passed the Republican-led Senate, and we're just waiting to see what House Democratic leadership will do with them.
Do they have any time? So there's no time frame for our guests that might not know the process. There isn't a time frame that the budget has to be. When does the budget has to be passed in a fiscal year?
June
It's
30th.
supposed to be passed the end of the
June
month.
30th. Yes.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
I thought it was June. That's why I said
Yeah.
when I was in the July. So it's the 25th of June right now is the recording of this, and so that doesn't look like that's going to happen. So is
We're
there
cautiously optimistic.
Is there, and hopefully we're wrong, but is there any, and it goes the way that we want, but is there any kind of repercussions when they don't pass a budget past the deadline? I mean, we see this in Washington all the time, and the slap on the wrist is that citizens can't go to see grizzly bears at national parks. But
right, like if they stop getting their paycheck, maybe they pass the budget.
Too. It's
right?
crazy. I mean, all I want to go is to Fort Necessity and learn about the French and Indian War for the 26th time. But I can't even do that when they shut down. But I mean, outside in Pennsylvania, I mean, what is that's the issue where I think regular everyday citizens have a problem with government, whether it's federal, local, state, is the fact that so they're playing this kind of game. It hurts a lot of the citizens because they don't know where this is going.
Yep.
And because there's a federal election that's big, presidential federal elections that are big, they kind of try to go alongside that. But I mean, so they have a budget with our money that we don't have any control to tell them, hold up. I mean, if you had a deadline in the construction business where I work in and you weren't done, you're either going to lose that job or you'll never get hired again. Or in some cases, you get fined per day as you go over the job. So like you lose, and that's the issue with where they can go over. You were saying a couple of years ago it went to December. I mean, that's ludicrous.
And they, last fiscal year, they did have the general appropriations allocated. They just needed to figure out which number was going to which issue. But exactly, it's confusing. And that's by design, because the less constituents know about it, the more members can get away with, right? So that's why, if you're listening in, check out americansforprosperity.org. Join our movement of millions, because we are holding members accountable to we the taxpayer, and they need to hear from you. If there's no budget in 5 days from now, then they need to hear from you. And quite frankly, we need then to be planning out for next legislative session around better budgeting. That should be at the top of both, House and Senate policy agendas. We need better budgeting.
And we need that at the state and the federal level.
Yes.
Which, is one thing I wanted to talk about really briefly, too, is that, we have a great economic fellow named Kurt Couchman. You can follow him on Twitter. Kurt Couchman with a C. But he has...
we'll link his information and everything.
He has a comprehensive budget proposal. And a lot of people don't realize that the current budget at the federal level doesn't include all of spending, and it doesn't even include all of the revenue. So 60% of spending and 100% of the revenue is not even in the appropriations bill. They don't get reviewed regularly. And we have all of these entitlement spending bills that are basically on automatic reset. They might get reviewed a little bit here and there, but they're not reviewed regularly. So we have Congress controlling a little piece of this huge pie, and we have everything on auto spend, basically. So, Kurt has come up with this comprehensive budget plan that would put everything in one pot. It would make it more transparent. It would allow for review. It would just put us on the right track for better fiscal responsibility. So that is something to check out. And that's just an example of how Americans for Prosperity is working to provide solutions for better governing.
And that would be, because you get into possibly a committee of some sort that can kind of hold, because I bet if they were to lose funding for their district or even some kind of punish, there
should be something
to hold them accountable that you have if it's
but the problem is they're the ones that have to introduce the bill to punish themselves, and it's not going to happen.
That's where an independent committee that's maybe elected but not elected as a member of the state. That was, I don't know if anybody's ever come up with an idea like that where there's a third party solution of almost like an independent auditing that the public can that's outside of that's not a state rep or a state senator that can look at a yearly budget and hold them accountable to where or it should come down in the place of the governor should step in. That's where executive orders should come in, and if you have to pass this, it has to be passed by this date. Or
we can hold them accountable in November.
Yeah.
That's also another alternative.
So how many
Right.
seats are up in the
In the state legislature?
Yeah.
Yep. Every single state house seat is up, and then half of the Senate. So it's if you live in a Senate district that's an odd number, ends in an odd number, then they are up for re-election this year. So it's a big year. And certainly there's interest. I mean, the big secret, that's not really a secret, is that members want to get this budget passed, wrapped up, and move on. So there's certainly incentive to do that. We're watching to see what the number in total will be, and really how that's allocated. Because quite frankly, we should keep as much of the rainy day fund and also keep more money in people's pockets.
And here's a maybe for our viewers and listeners, state representatives are similar to a congressman, congresswoman. How many years do they serve? So is it 2?
2, yep.
Okay,
and
it's just
then,
like Congress, and then
yep,
the Senate
senators serve 4.
4. Okay, so remember that every 2 to 4 years, if you don't like what your local Senate, make sure you get out and take action.
And call them before that too.
and
Call them
yeah.
beforehand.
You know, everybody's really focused on the presidential race, but they have to realize there's so many other down ballot important elections this year. You know, and we do hear people saying, "Oh, I'm not happy with either candidate on the presidential ballot. I'm going to stay home." Don't stay home.
Yeah.
Absolutely don't stay home. There's so many other races that you need to get involved in and educate yourself on.
Absolutely. So getting into one of my last questions here, topics, we kind of touched on it earlier, but after the 2024 elections, obviously it can go one way, and that could be stayed in. And, let's just hypothetically say it goes in the path that your organization, the ones you support, win, and it can go and say, Donald Trump wins again and is president again, and Pennsylvania takes over the House or whatnot. I mean, what does that look like? And then what does it possibly look like? I mean, does your plan completely change off of it, or is it really you're going to still go off of your foundation and your work, no matter who's in office?
Yep.
Because, it can be drastically different. I mean, obviously you don't want to take your foot off the gas and just allow, because how on the Republican side, it's the same thing. They have to be held accountable as well. I mean, because we've been down that road with how many of them in state and federal. So is there a big difference? Do you guys plan for that, I guess,
yes.
is where I'm getting. Is there talks with what this looks like in 8 months, 9 months from now?
There is. So we have a plan, regardless of outcome, in both Washington and Harrisburg, what our policy agenda will look like. And what's beautiful about the work that we do is that we will exist regardless of outcome, because there will always be a need for accountability. Now, certainly we've had 4 years of accountability, and we would love to be in the driver's seat of driving policy. But, regardless of outcome, we will still be in districts, in, meeting with members, talking with them about policies that we support and oppose. And, I think there's a lot on the ballot this November. But regardless of outcome, I'll kick it to Mary Beth to talk about the fiscal cliff. But regardless of outcome, we will have policy solutions that both sides agree with. So I'll give you a perfect example of that. So in this divided government in Harrisburg, we were able to get telemedicine, an issue that within our healthcare policy space that we care so deeply about, passed through a Democrat-controlled chamber and to the Senate. Actually, no, I'm sorry, vice versa. It started in the Senate and then passed through the House. This is something that is going to bring greater access to healthcare for, tons of rural Pennsylvanians.
Can you describe telemedicine
Sure.
to somebody that might not know, it's listening, that doesn't know
Sure.
what it is?
Absolutely. So, this would require, so let's say you're a single mom, you're at work, you need to see a doctor quickly, but your schedule doesn't allow you to. A lot of times insurance providers will allow for telehealth appointments. So you can hop on your phone, your computer, and see a physician within a matter of hours. It's really quite great. And, some insurances do cover this. We worked on a bill that will hopefully be on the governor's desk soon, knock on wood. But we worked on a bill that would allow every Pennsylvanian to receive this kind of access to health care and allow outside practitioners to deliver this service to Pennsylvanians. And, we need to address the growing healthcare crisis. There's a healthcare shortage. So if we can allow free market principles to address some of these issues, then we as Pennsylvanians are going to be in better shape, especially as we have an aging population. So that's a perfect example of legislation that we were able to work on in a divided government. And there's plenty more where that comes from.
So in that case, just to get in a little more detail about what it was, A, who the heck would oppose that? But B,
you'd be surprised.
I don't know.
It took a couple years to get it through.
So and why? But I guess. So, because I've used telehealth before myself, and so I understand that, and it is very convenient. Yeah. You can do it right from your phone. You get your appointment. It's just so convenient. It's so it saves so much time. What if you don't feel like driving? What if you're so ill, especially with COVID and everything that went on?
Right.
You don't want to leave the house and go into it. So
for rural communities,
that's where you don't have as many doctors.
Yeah.
So if there, all that said, what is so was it an insurance issue, I guess is where I'm trying to get at, where they didn't want to cover that, and now the state is trying to cover those costs? Was that where the bill was? Or, because again, I'm trying to wrap my head around why it wasn't, and especially it took this long in 2024, and B, who would oppose this? And why they would? I mean, you don't have to get into names, but why? Question. That's kind of crazy.
There was some back and forth in previous sessions around whether or not to include certain medications if they could be delivered via telehealth services. With the change in composition in the House, we were then able to pass through both the Senate and the House a clean bill. The idea would be that all insurances who cover patients in Pennsylvania could then be reimbursed for those. Or patients would have to be reimbursed for those telehealth services.
As opposed to having to pay out of pocket.
Exactly.
And the concern, too, is because in case somebody would get, if they with certain medications that they don't want out, it could get taken or stolen or misdelivered or whatnot. Because, I mean, they have to be delivered to the pharmacies anyway. So at some point, they're being delivered. If they were worried about it not getting to its delivery stage, I mean, I get where that concern would be, but I don't know, delivery services are pretty good today. I mean, you deliver everything. They're bringing stuff in by drones at some states. So it's like, I mean, your Amazon delivery is going to be here in an hour in like 2 years. So
yes, it's more so the type of prescription.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And so now is that, you got that passed, and that is a case scenario where both sides of the aisle work together, which makes sense.
Tons of bipartisan agreement, yes, and we're super excited about that. But all of that to be said, that's a perfect example of a policy agenda that we can pass regardless of outcome. There's always going to be back and forth noise, and I think that partisan noise is something we tend to focus on. But truly, when you get through the noise, there's a lot of points of agreement amongst Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and regardless of political outcome, that's what we need to focus on, being pragmatic regardless of the political climate.
So moving forward then off of that, what's like just one more maybe touch on, you said you planned for it, obviously you guys haven't, but again, is it a drastic difference, I guess is where I'm trying to get at? Or is it more of just like
moving forward?
Yeah, because this could be, that's what I mean. This could be.
So the biggest issue that we already know that we're going to tackle in 2025 is what we call the fiscal cliff. At the end of 2025, there's a lot of tax cuts that expire. The debt limit will be reached again, so there'll have to be a debt limit discussion. The Tax Cuts and Job Acts expire. The Affordable Health Care Act subsidies expire. So all of these policies that are expiring will impact everybody, whether you're an individual, because the tax rates are going to be increased, possibly, depending on who's in office and what the legislature does, for individuals, for small businesses, for S-corps, for corporations. If you're someone who buys Obamacare, the subsidies that are keeping your monthly payments down are expiring. So you could be looking at healthcare premium increases. There are so many areas that are impacted at the end of 2025 when these things all expire. So we're drawing attention to that because whoever is elected to Congress is going to have to deal with this, whether they're Democrat or Republican. They're going to have a lot of decisions to make. Right? So, we are bringing this to the attention now of people, but we haven't really doubled down and decided what we're going to support and not support because we're going to look at the landscape after the election and see what's feasible for us to support or not support. So there'll be more to follow on this and much more detail. But that already, I can tell you, is going to be our number one priority.
But check out americansforprosperity.org to see what the
Well, I was going to say we can have you on in 6 months, and we'll see where the landscape is.
There was one thing I wanted to touch on too, because you mentioned that the number 2 issue impacting people when you go to doors and when you make phone calls is immigration and the border. And we didn't really talk about what Americans for Prosperity's view is on that. So I thought it would be really good for your listeners to know that our view on that is basically we have 2 issues. Border is one issue, immigration is another. A lot of people would just confuse those, and they're 2 separate issues. So our border policy is basically we need high fences and we need wide gates. And what that means is we need to secure our border for the safety of Americans, whether that's through, in some areas it might be a border wall. In other areas it might be more Border Patrol agents. In other areas it might be drones and technology. It's varying ways to secure the border. And then in regards to immigration, we need to have more lawful ways to bring good people in here who can fill jobs that we need filled and to contribute to our economy. So we need to improve our immigration system, but at the same time we need to secure our border. And that is the policy of Americans for Prosperity. Mm-hmm. And we have partnered with Border Patrol Chief retired Chris Clem, who was a Border Patrol agent chief for several years down on the Mexico border. And he is going around doing educational talks with us. So if anybody out there listening wants to know how to have Chief Clem come, but he's been to Pennsylvania numerous occasions. We've been to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and he gives a really good analysis of the problems at the border, and he can talk much more thoroughly than I can and does a great job. So I just wanted to bring that up because we kind of mentioned that was important to voters, but I wanted them to know where Americans for Prosperity stood on that issue.
Okay. Lastly, what events are coming up? Is there any? Where's the gas events? Because I want to go to those ones.
Oh, Mary Beth can answer this one.
Any gas events, or just town hall meetings? It's as of this recording, it's June 25th, 2024. So moving forward, say in the next 30, 90 days, or even up until the election, is there any really big events that you want to spotlight? And again, we can put all these in the description and whatnot so they would be able to find them and get to the website and whatnot.
I think the best place to find our events is on Americans for Prosperity Pennsylvania Facebook page. And I post them personally on my LinkedIn, Beth Cirucci on LinkedIn. So our big event that we have coming up is in Port Royal, Pennsylvania on July 3rd. We are heading up to the racetrack there, and we are the sponsor for, it's a dirt racetrack for racing. And we're going to have about 5,000 people in attendance and then potentially 100,000 people viewing on television. So we'll be there all day. We'll be in the parking lot. We'll be at the race. We'll be sponsoring the race. So we're going to have a lot of people from our team there. We have a lot going on in the Philadelphia area. Our sister organization, Libre Initiative, is very active in Hazleton and Allentown and Philly areas, doing issues with the Hispanic community. And they're doing a lot of gas giveaways out there, and they're doing grocery giveaways. So that's another thing for your viewers to follow. And
just check out at AFP Pennsylvania on X or Americans for Prosperity Pennsylvania on Facebook. We're constantly updating our channels with events in your neighborhood. And just join our movement. Stay in touch. We can also bring an opportunity for an event to you. If you think of, if you have an opportunity to get in front of a number of constituents. So we want to partner with you. If you're listening in, stay in touch online, and we look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event.
And my 2 other favorite websites, we like websites in our organization, prosperityspossible.com and Bidenomics.com. We own that URL, so you can go there and fact check President Biden at Bidenomics.
And there is a Bidenomics car that drives around the state. So.
There's a Bidenomics van, and there's my Prosperity is Possible Jeep. If you see me driving around in my Jeep, honk at me.
Is that not the most fortuitous failure of this administration, that President Joe Biden did not buy Bidenomics.com?
You would think, right? I mean,
yeah, that's a great story if you have time for it, because we created the URL Badonomics with a BAD, and we started, talking about how Bidenomics is bad economics and it costs American family $11,400 more per year just to live the same lifestyle they had 4 years ago. And then, I guess somebody in our marketing team just typed in Bidenomics.com to see what was on there and realized the URL was available. So we bought it.
Go and GoDaddy for $4.99, because now it's probably worth. You could sell that thing for who knows how much. I'm serious. I couldn't even get my own companies. I was like, what the heck? This guy wants $17,000 for this. Yeah, that's how it is. No, that's a good story. So, we'll post a link to everything under our description and for your website. So, and again, if any of the listeners want to get involved, reach out through the website, correct? They can get a town hall meeting, any kind of event, and get potentially sponsored, and then look for those gas and grocery events. Those sound nice. That's really good, and your work is not gone unnoticed.
Thank you.
Really, and so I'm sure everybody listening, they're appreciative of your work, and like I said, we can have you on maybe in 6 months or so.
Post-election update.
We'll do a post-election update. We'll see how much we're smiling. So, Mary Beth, thank you.
Thanks.
Emily, thank you. Americans for Prosperity. Check out the website, and we'll post everything for all their social media. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining the Saga Media podcast today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.